All right, good to see you this morning. Thankful for this time together. Let's bow for a word of prayer, then we'll begin our class this morning. Our Father in heaven, again, we're so grateful for another Lord's Day and for all that it means. We're thankful, Father, for thy great love and wisdom and mercy, and for the love of thy Son to come and to become one of us and to die for us, that we might have hope to escape the penalty that we rightly deserve. It's your love that overwhelms us and that causes us to fall before thee and to praise thy name. Thou art all knowledge and all wisdom and all power, merciful, ever-present God. We ask that you would be with us this hour. Bless each one gathered here. Help us to put this time to good use. We're so thankful for thy word and for the light that it provides for us. Without it, we do not know the way to go. And so we're thankful for this time to open thy book. May we, with open hearts, learn the lessons that it teaches. Do be with and bless our number who are not with us, who may be traveling or hindered in some way. We pray that we might be able to be back together again soon. But bless us this hour, and we pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so we are looking at the book of Genesis and drawing that study to a close. Last time we were together, we were looking at chapter 42, and that deals with the first trip down to Egypt by the brothers. The famine had come to Canaan, and so God has installed Joseph in a position of authority and wisdom to preserve life. So chapter 42 has them come down, and of course they don't recognize Joseph. He recognizes them. He accuses them of being spies. He's putting them to the test ultimately, and it winds up that he keeps Simeon back and sends them to go and to fetch, come back again, but bring Benjamin, your younger brother, with you. This is not a plan that pleases Jacob in any way. But in chapter 43, the famine continues. And so it is that we find they are forced to go back to Egypt, and this time to bring Benjamin. And so there's this occasion where Joseph sees his full brother, but he still is hiding his identity at this point. Chapter 44, we find a test has been provided by Joseph to see whether these brothers have changed or not. He sends them back home, but he hides his cup in one of their sacks, in the sack, in fact, of Benjamin. As the test is orchestrated, we find that Benjamin is found to be guilty of having this cup. And Joseph says to the brothers, you guys can leave, you just have to leave him to pay the price. And they're not willing to do that. And at the end of chapter 44, there's this beautiful speech by Judah in which he says, I've given myself to be surety for this, my brother, and take me instead. And that's where chapter 45 opens the story as Joseph reveals himself to his brethren in chapter 45. Then Joseph could not restrain or refrain himself before all that stood by him, caused everybody to leave except for his family. This is a family matter. He wept aloud, but the Egyptians heard him weeping in the house of Pharaoh. And then verse 3, and Joseph said to his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And the brethren could not answer, for they were troubled at his presence. Let me pause there quickly. You know, one thing that must have absolutely stunned them was the fact he used that name. Now, as far as we know, there's no indication that they'd ever given the name of their brother that was lost. But he's called by name here. In fact, this man claims to be Joseph. And then he asks them, does my father yet live? Did they not already tell him that the father was still alive? I wonder why he would ask that again. By the way, he calls him my father, not just your father, my father. I don't know exactly. Maybe it was because he was not 100% sure they were telling the truth about such things. They had deceived before. But anyway, this shocking sentence comes out of his mouth, and they're just stunned. They can't answer. Troubled at his presence, Joseph says, "Come here." And so they come near to him. And he says to them, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." How could he know that? They hadn't told him that. Hadn't told anybody that. Could this possibly be true? Is this really him? Who else could it be? Verse 5, "Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life." Pause again. He says, I don't want you to be angry with yourselves. Joseph was not angry with them. One of the great lessons Joseph teaches is the complete lack of bitterness. You know, that Joseph had come to terms with what happened. And as events transpired, what he had come to believe is that this is all a part of a bigger plan for God to do good. It didn't mean what the brothers did to him was good. It was not. It was never good. But now, Joseph, with time and perspective, has come to terms with it. And he said, I really believe that this is the work of God to do a greater work, a greater good in preserving life. Not just the life of Israel, but the life of the Egyptians, the life of those in the area. And then he says in verse 6, "These 2 years hath the famine been in the land." There are 5 more coming. There's not going to be plowing and not going to be harvest. And again, verse 7, "God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, ruler of his lord of his house, and a ruler among the land of Egypt." I want you to notice, how many times does he point to God in this context? Chapter 5, or verse 5 rather, 7, 8, and then one more in the next verse. 4 times he keeps the focus on God. This is, I believe in the providence of God, and I believe the things that have happened are the work of God. And so he says in verse 9, "Haste ye, go up to my father, and say to him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord over all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near to me, thou and thy children, thy children's children, thy flocks, and thy herds, all that thou hast. And I will nourish thee." For there are 5 years of famine coming. "Lest thou and thy household, all that thou hast, come to poverty. And," one more thing, "I'm going to take care of you till you die. Behold, your eyes see," he says to his brothers, "and the eyes of my brother Benjamin. And it's me that speaks. You tell my father to make haste and to come down to me." So that's what happens. In verse 14, he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, wept a long while. What a reunion that must have been. What a moment. And then verse 15, he kissed all of his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. I'd love to know what they said. He does not tell us. Any question through verse 15 or points you'd like to make? Yes, sir.
One of the things we read is, like you said, he does point to God. But one of the things we should never, there's something we could read it and say, well, God made them hate. Made his brothers hate Joseph. God made this. No. He worked through, how they did things. He brought about good.
Right.
But they all had choice. And Joseph, he didn't make Joseph, or Joseph couldn't help but do good. Joseph had a choice, and I have no doubt wherever you put Joseph, he's going to do good. If circumstances are bad, circumstances are good, he's going to do good. And it just lets us know, today people want to point to, to make it out like God makes things happen. He's able to work around the choices we make. And if we look to him for the guidance and everything like that, we can have that kind of heart that Joseph has.
All right. Yes, sir. And then, Brother.
I was going to tag on to that a little bit. I don't know that I can understand everything. I just know that God's so much greater than I am and how he works. But also his providence, which you have been bringing out for the last couple of lessons, rightly so. It's sort of also, there's a little layer of his power over sin. There's so much sin's going on, yet he's taking that and he's making good out of it. Not that we should sin more, like I guess that's in Romans, I think. But he's taking these bad things where sin's involved, and he's making it work out for the better for us.
Yeah.
Because he loves us, and it's just it's an interesting little thing to think about how that applies to me too, and how it applies to us today, and how it applies to everybody's relationship with God. We understand that, where God lives, sin will not exist. But he uses sin, I guess, uses the works of Satan for his glory, if we do our part.
Yeah, the greatest example of that is the betrayal of Judas, that God used that. Didn't mean he blessed Judas for it, or it was a good thing, but God can't overcome. The devil's never going to outthink God, outplan him, is he? Yes, sir.
We look back to when the brothers ate dinner with Joseph, and he had them numbered in order from over Benjamin's portion was 5 times greater than everybody else. Do we have an idea of the age of Benjamin when Joseph was sold by his brother at 17? Do we know the mother died at the birth of Benjamin?
Right.
Do we know how old Benjamin may have been?
Not that I know of. Early 20s is probably the best guess, somewhere in that neighborhood. He wasn't.
When Joseph was sold, do we know?
Oh, sold.
He hadn't seen Benjamin since he was...
Right. He would have been quite young. Yes, sir. That's right. That's right, because this has been 20 years, so he would have been quite young. That's right. If he was early 20s, he would have been quite young. Yeah. That's right. So, the story moves on, verse 16. The fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. And Pharaoh was well pleased that Joseph's family had come. That's who these people were. He said to Joseph, tell your brethren to go to the land of Canaan, take your father, take your household. I'll give you the good of the land here. But come and live in Egypt. Take wagons, he says, in order to bring back your family, and also bring a present to your father. And so they did. Joseph, verse 21, gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, and to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this matter 10 asses laden with good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. And he sent them back home to fetch Jacob. And he told them, he said, see that you fall not out by the way. Verse 24. Back another translation of that in verse 24.
Do not quarrel.
Yeah, that's right. Don't quarrel by the way. Don't mess this up. They'd been capable of violence. There's no question in this. I don't want you to get distracted with that. This is not the time for that. This is the time now for reunion. It's a time for being appreciative of the blessing of God. So they go up out of Egypt and they go back to Canaan. And they say to Jacob in verse 26, Joseph is yet alive, and he's governor over all the land of Egypt, which must have seemed as strange as if they had said, Joseph has become a bird, is flapping around and flying all over. No, his heart fainted. He believed them not. Who can blame him? And they told him all the words of Joseph. And he saw the wagons And I'm sure he doesn't specifically say this, but Joseph implied it. He says, now you know what you've seen, and Benjamin too. Maybe Benjamin's word meant more than the older brother's word did because of past transgressions on their part. But when he saw all of this and heard the testimony, his spirit revived. In verse 26, his heart fainted. In 27, he got his heart back. And by verse 28, he is convinced, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. What a moment that must have been. It's just hard to know. Maybe you've been in a situation where you've had news that was incredible and good. Maybe we've had some incredible and bad. But anyway, this is a moment. 20 plus years he's been mourning a son that was still alive. And now, he is the blessing of the prospects of seeing him again. And that brings us to chapter 46, when Israel moves down to Egypt. Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Jacob. Second time he's leaving, isn't it? This is the same fellow that went to Padan Aram and looking for a wife, right? And that's been a long time before, 50 years maybe before. But now he's making his way back out of the country, this time to the south. This time he comes to Beersheba. And Beersheba, by the way, is a place where his father Isaac had worshipped. It's a place where his grandfather Abraham had worshipped. And so he's making his way down to Beersheba, and he offers sacrifice to God. And God speaks to him in verse 2. Calls to him in a vision of the night, Jacob, Jacob. He said, here am I. And then God says this. He says, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. God makes that promise to Joseph, to Jacob. It will be well. This is all again within the realm of my plan. This is a part of my providence. The nation will grow in Egypt. I don't know what all he knew of the promise. Surely he did, that God made to Abraham back in Genesis 15, wasn't it? Where he promised him that he would be, his descendants would be sojourners in a land not theirs. This is a part of this promise that God made to his grandfather, and now is coming to fruition. Verse 5, so Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, their wives, their wagons which Pharaoh sent, and took their cattle and their goods and all that they had gotten in Canaan, and came into Egypt. And so they were now strangers in a strange land. Now verse 8 begins this little summary of those who went. The names of the children of Israel according to the birth mothers. So the children of Leah are mentioned there, sons and sons' sons. And then the children of Zilpah and the children of Bilhah, they're finally the children of Rachel. And so the number given for all of this group is 70 in verse 27. And there's a discussion that we'll not maybe have at this point in time, because the Septuagint lists that as 75. And Stephen actually quotes the Septuagint in the book of Acts and calls it 75. And there are several explanations that have been offered. I'm not sure which is the truth, but it could well be that simply the account given in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, for whatever reason, includes some grandchildren not mentioned in the Masoretic, the Old Hebrew text. So, again, smarter folks than me can debate about which would be the appropriate or proper or right number. But the idea is that it's 70. Of course, even that doesn't include everybody, does it? I don't think we have all the wives mentioned here, for example. But it's a small number that went down into Egypt on this occasion. But how many will come out of Egypt? 600 plus thousand men, warriors, plus women, children, maybe a couple of million. You know, when God said, I'm going to make a great nation, you know, he meant exactly what he said. And of course, again, as you know, all of this is a part of God's plan to separate these people, that is God's people, from the Canaanites. Things are going to get worse and worse in Canaan. Isn't that what God told Abraham all those years before? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full, but it will be. And when it gets to that point, and as it's getting to that point, God doesn't want his people in Canaan. They're already too easily influenced. Let them go to Egypt. What's different about Egypt? You know this. We haven't talked about it yet, but you know it. Yes, sir.
They will not be mingling with
Yeah.
Egyptians.
Yeah, exactly. That point's made specifically. So, again, you see the wisdom of God always ahead of men's. He's got the answer for men figure out the questions. And this is the nature of the providence of God. But as has been pointed out, and rightly so, the providence of God does not make us robots. It does not eliminate free will. And I may not ever be able to understand exactly how those things mesh, but I do not think for a moment God made Judas evil. But God used a man who bent his heart toward evil, even that in order to work a purpose that he had in mind. My job is to obey God, and I can do that, and nothing keeps me from doing that. That's my choice to do or not to do. But do not think that I am going to thwart the plan of God any more than in Psalm 2, when there were some who thought they could stop the Lord from taking, that is, Christ, from taking his place on the throne. He'll laugh, the psalmist said, at those who think they're going to stop the plan of God in that regard. So anyway, back to the point. We have here a little indication of those who came down, 70 souls who will grow into a nation. At this point, there's just still a big family. Any point through 27, you have something to say. Yes, sir. Excuse me.
The reason why God's moving them down to Egypt is blatantly obvious just from the texts that we have. You know, everywhere from Lot to Esau to all the other various sons of Jacob that we saw earlier a few chapters ago, just all the trouble that they've gotten up to just with people of the land and with the daughters of the land and everything else. It's blatantly obvious that it's only going to lead to things getting worse and worse and worse. We already have a set of where it's basically as we'll see at the end of the book, when Jacob is blessing everyone on his deathbed, that his first three sons, they're not worthy of the blessing of the firstborn just for the things that they did.
Right.
And so there's already significant corruption. He needs to separate them from it.
Right.
The other thing also, I've noticed, the timeline of Joseph's life, he is like a type of Christ, if you look at it. From the time when he was growing up, just parallels his time in heaven before he came to earth. He was the most beloved and seemingly the best of Jacob's sons. Then he went, now him not voluntarily, but he went down to Egypt and he served, like Christ did during his time on earth, teaching and serving others, falsely accused, is cast into prison, representing a parallel of Christ's death. Then he's raised up, and he's made he's given dominion over everything.
Yeah, that's right. Back in chapter 46, I should say, verse 28, and he sent Judah before him unto Joseph. They've come now into the territory of Egypt, And Judah is sent as the emissary. And you'll notice how that, excuse me, by the way, just point of interest or whatever, if I don't shake hands with you today, I've got a little tickle. I don't know why. I don't think I'm deathly ill, but I'm going to try to be careful and cautious. I'm not trying to be unfriendly. I ain't scared of you. I'm scared of me. So anyway, but so verse 28, it's Judah that's sent ahead in order to make the arrangements. We're here. Joseph made ready his chariot, comes out to meet his father in the land of Goshen. And here's this great reunion. And again, just there's a part of us that might say, I wish I had the whole scene here. If men had written the book of Genesis, mere men, this would have been 4 chapters. But all we have is that Joseph comes to his father. The old translation says, fell on his neck and wept upon his neck a good while. We can understand this powerful moment. And Israel said to Joseph, let me die. Now let me die. In other words, there's nothing in this life that could be greater than this. I have my greatest hope realized. I've seen your face. You're yet alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's house, I'm going to go up and I'm going to tell Pharaoh that you're here. And I'm going to tell him that you're shepherds. That's your trade. You deal in cattle. You're cattle men. And he's going to want to talk to you. And he's going to ask you what your occupation is. That's what you tell him. Tell him you've been in this business your whole life, and that you will continue in this business. And the purpose of that would be that God would grant that you would have this land isolated apart, perfect for your business in Goshen, in order to maintain and to be maintained. And then this note in verse 34, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. We talked about that, I think, a little bit last time. He doesn't explain to us all the reasons why. There are several suggestions that have been offered. But the point is that it was there, that there was a separation between the Egyptian and what he saw is this foreigner who by the nature of what he did, I mean, the Egyptians had some animals, but there was something about the practice of shepherds in general, cattlemen in general, that was offensive to the Egyptians, or maybe they just thought it was low-class work, whatever it might be, that separated them from the Egyptians. They were not ever going to assimilate into this new society. They were always going to be sojourners. That's the term that we find here. Any other question or point about chapter 46 that you have in mind? All right, chapter 47 then. And then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren, their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and they are in Goshen. Excuse me. And so he took some of his brethren, that is Joseph did, 5 in number. We don't know who. We can wonder about that, but I'm sure he had a reason for picking them and for culling the group. And so they come and have an audience with Pharaoh, these 5 of the brothers. And it goes just like Joseph said it would. Pharaoh asked them, what is your occupation? And they said, thy servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers. And they said, moreover, unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come. For thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. By the way, do you have another word for sojourn in verse 4? The first part of verse 4. Anybody got a word? Nobody has another word. How about that? I think one translation put that as temporary residence in the land. That's what a sojourner is, isn't it? It's not a word we use all that much, but it's the idea of someone who is just, we're not coming to stay. We're coming temporarily. By the way, how temporary was that stay? 400 years. So that's quite a temporary stay. But it was temporary. It always was intended to be that. That word will come back up in just a minute, won't it? So, verse 5, Pharaoh spake to Joseph and said, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. The best of the land make thy father and thy brethren to dwell in the land of Goshen. Just exactly what we wanted. Joseph got this played out well and perfectly. So he says, and if you know any men of activity among them. Do you have another translation of that expression, men of activity, in verse 6? Excuse me. Competent men, yeah. Anybody else have one? Able men, yeah. Industrious men, efficient men, strong men, different translations. Yeah, we get the picture, don't we? If you got somebody there who can handle it, then let them help out my people. Let them take over watching of my cattle. So, verse 7, after the brothers, the 5 of the brothers, have their visit with Pharaoh, now Jacob, the patriarch, comes forward. Verses 7 through 10. Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. We'll come back to that in just a second. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and I have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. That's an interesting answer, isn't it? How old are you? Is that a rude question? How old do you think I am? No, that's not the way we see that, is it? Age was revered, especially in ancient Egypt at this time. Age was revered. And so it was rather a compliment to say, now you are an old man, aren't you? That's a little different than we find today. And what was Jacob's answer to that? Well, he gave him the factual number. What was the factual number, by the way? 130 years. But then he commented about that. And what did he say?
It's not as many as my dad did that,
Yeah,
you know?
which was true.
I've worked hard all my life, and it's wore me down.
Few and evil, as the old translation puts it. Yeah, few and evil. Maybe he was just being self-depreciating there. But it was true that compared to some of the other patriarchs, his life, of course, now he wasn't done either. I got the feeling he feels like he was about done, but maybe, actually, the Lord's going to allow him to live for another 17 years. But few and evil, what comes to mind when you hear that answer? Yes, sir.
I think about Laban, Laban did it
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, his life had not been easy, had
They
it?
said it seemed like when God would bless Joseph, Laban would change. What did he say? He changed my wages 10 times.
10 times.
I'm just assuming there that's what it was. If these are doing it better now, I'll take these.
Yeah,
I don't know that that's a fact, but I think about Laban.
yeah, exactly. And that was better part of 2 decades he was there, 14 years plus. So that's part of it. What else did he face? Yes, sir.
Well, the heartache of losing Joseph,
Joseph, yeah.
losing Rachel, those are, knowing fellows that are widowers, knowing people that are
Yeah.
lost children, it takes a lot out of you.
No question, no question. Yes, sir.
Conflict with Esau.
Yeah, the conflict with Esau was just, what a way to start. Why did he leave home? Well, again, the Lord has a plan, but part of it just trying to get away from his brother, trying to kill him. Don, you had something? I'm sorry.
I was just going along with that, how he talks, how he, with those sheep and everything, he bore the heat, he lost sleep over it. I mean, it's just like everything he did, he put himself into it, and like
He
you
did.
mentioned, all the emotional and the, just, he was just like being ground down, and so many, it wasn't, he didn't have an easy life.
Yeah, so when you find folks, or maybe you feel that point where we haven't had it easy, we're not the first ones to walk that road. I'm not diminishing that. I'm just saying, and I think God loved him. I think in this case, in Jacob's case, he probably could look back on some of that and say, I brought some of that on myself. I think that's fair too. But anyway, you know, I can see Pharaoh saying, oh, you are an old man. That's glorious. And he said, well, it's not as glorious as my father's, and it hadn't been easy. That's, I think, the answer he gives. Few and evil have been my days. I've not lived the years of my fathers. In the days of their, what does he say in the last phrase there in verse 9? Yes, sir.
I mean, to mention something else.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
You mentioned about they arrived on donkeys and they previously had camels, and maybe life hadn't been as good for them, financially. And then go through the famine, and then have to resort to eat to survive. So
Yeah.
they're all in the plan. We know that.
Yes, sir, right. Yeah, it's not been all easy. It wasn't for a lot of great men that lived through the years, and women. So I need to quit feeling sorry for myself and just say, look, this life is not heaven. And I don't mean that to diminish people's suffering. I'm just saying for myself, you know, suffering is real, but don't ever give in to that pity, self-pity. I cannot do that. Yes, you had a point.
I think you were looking for pilgrimage, is that what you're?
Yes, sir, I was.
Yeah, Chris had something.
No, that was it. I just found it interesting that he mentioned that his pilgrimage, sojourning,
Yeah,
that was his life.
his life and the life of his fathers. Yes, that's a great point. When you, you know, not to quit the class and go to preaching, but when you think about how the Bible represents our life as a pilgrimage, it's 1 Peter, isn't it? 1 Peter 2:11. Somebody will read that for me. 1 Peter 2:11. Excuse me. I beseech you as pilgrims.
I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against.
That's it. Our whole life is really, in one sense. We're here, strangers in a strange land. This is not our home. I'm just a passing through, as the song says. God help me to never forget that. Never forget that. So, it's just this language here is great. All right. Let me get back on the formula here. Verse 10, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. He started by blessing Pharaoh. He ends the audience by blessing Pharaoh. The greater blesses the lesser. He doesn't tell us what the blessing was, but I just find that fascinating. Maybe it was something along the lines of, you have been a help to us, and may God be a help to you. May God bless you. So Joseph placed his father and his brothers and gave them possession just exactly where he wanted to. In the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh commanded. And he nourished his father and his brethren and his father's household with bread according to their families, according to the need. So we said Joseph feeds his family, and he does. He also feeds Egypt. And we have in the rest of the chapter some detail about that. The famine was sore in the land of Egypt, as well as it was in other places. So over time, Joseph gathered up all the silver because these folks paid till they didn't have any more money. But the famine was still there. And so they needed food. And so Joseph, when the money ran out, and they said, give us bread, Joseph said, give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if the money fails. Excuse me. So, it winds up that the money, where'd the money go, verse 14, by the way? People have been critical of Joseph and his dealing with this. Joseph did not one thing to enrich himself, not one thing. Joseph was working for Pharaoh, and he was not working unjustly, I believe. But at any rate, this is a crisis, an emergency. People's lives are on the line. And so he does the right thing by the people and by Pharaoh. After the silver runs out, they wind up deeding over their cattle, flocks, herds, horses, asses, to Pharaoh. But there's still a need. And so then they devote themselves as servants, our bodies and our lands, verse 18. This is what they say, verse 19. This is the people. They say, wherewith shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. Do not think of this as some sort of an enforced slavery. Think of it as people who are saying, we are not capable of taking care of ourselves. We will come under the protection of Pharaoh and his care. And they do that willingly in this case. So, verse 20, Joseph bought up all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, not for himself. And we do go from more of a private-owned to a state-owned economy. But of course, the state now is responsible for feeding the people. And under Joseph, that's exactly what they do. He removes them, the old translation reads, to cities. Some of the translations read differently there in verse 21. Now, this did not apply to the lands that had been separated, designated as devoted to the Egyptian religions. The land of the priest were not under this arrangement. And Moses, for whatever reason, chooses to tell us that. But verse 23 of chapter 47. Joseph said to the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you that you sow the land. When the disaster was now past, the famine was over, and the land would yield again. He said, I bought you for Pharaoh. You belong to him. And so here's what he asks of you. When the increase comes, you shall give a fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be of your own. I've flunked math in 3 states, but what's the percentage there? 20%. 20%. 20% tax rate, we'd say. I got to looking and trying to stir my memory. Sharecropping was not unknown in this country, even just a few years ago. Probably there's some folks that you know whose parents grew up, they've grown up in a sharecropping type situation. Sharecropping was that a guy would come in, a family would come sit on land that was not theirs, owned by somebody else. And usually, at best, the arrangement would be 50% of what's grown here and the sweat you put into it belongs back to the owner, and then 50% with them, maybe even more for the owner. But in this case, I think it's really a much more reasonable arrangement in this case. So I don't see this as Joseph trying to harm people in any way. He's trying to save people, and at the same time do right by his master Pharaoh. And that's the way they took it. Verse 25, the people said, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And so, letting the people speak, they don't seem to feel put upon. And Israel dwelt in the land of Goshen, and had possessions there, and grew exceedingly. So Egypt has been spared, and Israel is thriving at this point. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. That is, after he came to Egypt, he had 17 years. I don't know if this is what the significance of this is, but what age was Joseph when he was taken away from his father? 17. Now, the first 17 of the last 17 years here are spent back with his father, not of Joseph's life, but of Jacob's life. The time drew near that he must die. And so he says to Joseph. Jacob says to Joseph, swear to me, don't bury me in Egypt. That is, don't leave me here. The Lord's going to come. He's going to fulfill his promise. And when he does, I want you to make sure that I'm buried in Canaan. That's where I want to be buried. I say that, I think this is all based upon the fact that Canaan ultimately, as Jacob knew, was going to be the homeland. It didn't happen in his lifetime, but he said, this is never going to be home. Bury me in Canaan. And so he swore to him. And of course, as we go on and read the story, that's exactly what he did. My time is up. We'll try to finish out, we will plan to finish out 48, 49, 50 next time.